I'm Rachel. I served as a logistics officer in the U.S. Marine Corps for 8 years. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered, even if my father never believed it did. He was a soldier too. Army, back in the early 82nds. Spent most of his adult life telling me what I wasn't, instead of asking who I'd become. To him, Marines were supposed to be men who kicked indoors and carried scars. I carried spreadsheets, radios, crates of supplies, and backup generators. I also carried out entire missions, but that part never seemed to count. Once, when I got promoted to captain, he didn't even say congratulations. He just looked up from his coffee and asked if that meant I'd finally get a real deployment. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. When I told him I was going to organize his funeral the military way, he smirked. Said something like, "At least I'll go out looking like a real soldier." I remember standing there, holding his discharge papers, wondering if he even heard himself. Now he's gone. I'm standing in a church, folding a flag. I've been trained to do this, but nothing prepared me for the weight of silence between us. There's this old metal box in my hand, the kind they use for ashes. I'm not crying, not really. I just feel hollow, like everything I ever wanted to say never made it out. My brother didn't come, can't blame him. They hadn't spoken in years. It's mostly other veterans here, guys who knew him from barbecues and morning jogs around the lake. None of them knows me. Not really. A young Marine taps my shoulder. Says he recognizes me from a base in Kandahar. I nod politely, assuming he's mistaken. But he smiles like he knows something I don't. And for the first time that day, I feel something shift. Like maybe the story I've always told myself about me and my dad is about to change. I take a deep breath. The service hasn't even started yet. But somehow, I know this won't just be about burying a father. It's going to be about unearthing something I didn't expect to find. Maybe recognition, maybe peace, maybe just the truth I was owed all along. Most days, my job wasn't flashy. I coordinated supply chains, kept fuel moving, tracked gear, and built systems that made chaos manageable. We called it battlefield ballet, except no one clapped, and no one noticed unless something went wrong. There were nights I didn't sleep, running routes over satellite maps, rerouting trucks to avoid ambush zones. I once lost a convoy to a sandstorm and spent 12 hours in comms trying to recover every man and crate. When the last truck rolled in, covered in dirt and dents, I cried alone in a tent behind the command center. Then there was the injury. I was embedded with a delivery crew in Helmand. Our convoy hit a roadside bomb. I wasn't the closest, but the blast sent me flying into the side of a truck. I broke my collarbone and cracked 2 ribs. Later, in the hospital, I called Dad. I told him what happened. Careful not to dramatize it. I just needed him to say something. Anything. He paused for a second and said, "So, what, you tripped over boxes?" Then he chuckled, like it was funny. I laughed too, not because it was, but because it was easier than hearing what he really meant, that it didn't count. That I didn't count. He used to say, "If you're not in the dirt, you're not in the fight." Logistics was too clean for him, too safe. He never saw the fatigue behind my eyes, or the weight of decisions that determined who had what they needed to survive. He never asked about my deployments, my team, or the hours I spent making sure someone else could come home. He just kept pushing this idea that real soldiers bled on the front lines. I bled in silence, in spreadsheets, in contingency plans written at 3 a.m. That kind of work never impressed him. When I bought my first car, he asked if I used a dependent stipend. When I got promoted to captain, he said, "I guess they're handing those out to anyone now." Still, I kept calling, kept hoping he'd come around. The last call we had was short. I was back stateside, working on a domestic operations unit after a hurricane. I told him about a project we ran, getting power back to hospitals within 36 hours. He said, "Must be nice not to worry about getting shot at." I paused, like always, gave him space to walk it back. He didn't. Then he said it. "You'll never understand what real soldiers go through." I remember staring at my phone, not angry, just tired. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. He didn't call back. That was a year before he died. I'd love to say we made peace, but that would be a lie. What we had was distance, and the kind of silence that hardens over time. He saw what I wasn't, not what I was. And by then, I'd stopped trying to change his mind. There was one mission that still sticks with me. We'd gotten intel that a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan was about to lose comms and power. A freak sandstorm had knocked out their supply route, and most of their gear was stuck 2 provinces away. They were low on fuel, nearly out of water, and their med tent was barely functional. I was pulled into the situation room at 4 a.m. No coffee, no warning, just a blinking red map and a lieutenant yelling over satellite static. I studied the routes, flagged the choke points, and ran an alternate plan through a back channel no one had used in years. It was high risk, unpaved, full of old Soviet wreckage, but it was the only shot we had. We rerouted 6 convoys in under 12 hours. I stayed up for 36 straight, cycling drivers, recalculating drop points, coordinating with an air unit for emergency medical lifts. One team got stuck in a dried riverbed. I walked them through a manual extraction over comms using only an outdated grid map and my memory. The supplies reached the base just before dusk. One of the officers on site said it felt like watching a miracle unfold in reverse. Everything they'd counted on losing had arrived just in time. I didn't cry that night. I just stared at the logistics board and thought, this is why I joined. 3 days later, I got a package. No ribbons, no certificate, just a folded piece of lined paper. It was from the unit commander, Captain Isaac Perez. I'd never met him, never even spoken to him directly. It read, "You don't know me, but I know what you did. You saved my Marines. You gave me back my people. You don't carry a rifle, but you carry us. That matters, more than you'll ever be told." I folded the letter twice and tucked it into my wallet. I never showed it to anyone, not even my closest friends. Definitely not my father. He wouldn't have understood. Or maybe he would have, and just refused to say it. Either way, it became my quiet proof. My anchor on the days I questioned why I was still doing this. There were moments I could have transferred. I could have gone civilian, found a desk in D.C., or left the Corps altogether. But something in me kept showing up. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was duty. Maybe it was the hope that somewhere, someone like Captain Perez remembered what I did. I didn't need medals. I needed to matter. Years later, the letter was still there, folded soft at the corners, riding with me through every deployment. It reminded me that even if no one ever clapped, even if no one ever said the words, I had changed something. I had saved someone. And deep down I knew that was enough, or at least, it had to be. The morning of the funeral was cold, but I barely felt it. My hands were too busy folding uniforms, lining up flags, and making sure the brass plaques were polished. I'd run ops with less stress than this. Every detail had to be perfect. He would have wanted it that way. I kept thinking about what kind of honor I was giving a man who'd never given much to me. Not praise, not pride, not warmth. Still, I showed up. Not for him, maybe, but for what he stood for what he never gave, but what I still believed in. The chapel filled slowly. Old soldiers in faded uniforms. Neighbors from the VFW hall. A few family friends. Not one of them looked surprised to see me in dress blues. But no one said anything either. Just nods, just silence. I stood near the flag-draped urn, going over the ceremony order in my head. 21 gun salute. Folding of the flag. Final call. My heart thudded like a metronome, slow and steady, until someone tapped my shoulder. I turned. He couldn't have been more than 25. Clean shave, sharp creases in his uniform. He didn't salute. He didn't speak at first. just looked at me, like he was trying to place a memory. "You're Captain Rachel, right?" he asked quietly. I nodded, unsure. He smiled, almost shy. "You rerouted supply convoys to Camp Red Hawk 5 years ago. We were dead in the water until your shipments came through." My throat tightened. I hadn't heard that name in years. "I was one of the new guys in that unit," he said. "You saved our med tent, saved our fuel, saved us." I didn't say anything. Couldn't. It was like hearing someone speak a language I thought only existed in my head. "We never forgot," he said. "We just didn't know what you look like." Then he saluted. Not stiff, not performative, just clean, honest. And in that quiet space, something shifted. For the first time that day, I felt seen. He walked away to join the others. I stayed by the urn, staring at the flag like it might move. Like maybe, if he'd been there to hear that, my father would have finally understood. But maybe he already had. Maybe this funeral wasn't the end of our silence. Maybe it was the beginning of something else. 3 days after the funeral, my cousin Eric called. He'd been cleaning out my father's place and found something tucked in the back of an old dresser drawer. Said it had my name on it, in handwriting he almost didn't recognize. Said I should come pick it up myself. I drove over that evening. The house smelled like dust and time. Like nothing had been moved since before the diagnosis. Eric handed me a small envelope. Yellowed at the edges. Sealed, but thin. It felt almost too light to matter. Inside was a photo of me in uniform, standing outside HQ in Camp Lejeune. I didn't even remember it being taken. Folded with it was a single piece of notepad paper. Ripped at the bottom, the words were written in pencil, just a few lines. It said, "I was wrong. I didn't say it when I should have, and that's on me. You served with more honor than I ever did. I'm proud of you. Always was." That was it. No apology, no long confession. Just a handful of words that landed like bricks in my chest. I sat on the edge of his old recliner and read it again. Then again. My hands didn't shake, but my eyes felt warm in that way that makes you blink more than usual. I didn't cry. Not exactly. But something inside me softened, just enough to breathe deeper than I had in days. All those years of silence, and now this. A note that could have changed everything if it had come sooner. But it came. And in some quiet corner of him, I guess he knew what I needed to hear. He never said it out loud, never handed me that letter himself. But he wrote it, and maybe that was the best he could do. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my wallet, next to Captain Perez's letter. For the first time, they felt like they belonged together, like two pieces of the same truth. As I stood to leave, I looked around the house one last time. No ceremony, no goodbye. Just one quiet thought that came without warning. I wish you had stood sooner, but I'm glad you stood at all. Looking back, I think we all carry people inside us who never gave us what we needed. Maybe they didn't know how. Maybe they didn't have it to give. I used to think love had to look a certain way. Words, actions, recognition. But now, I'm not so sure. My father didn't say much. He rarely offered praise and never said he was proud of me while he was alive. But in that note, scratched on cheap paper, he finally did. And it mattered. It didn't fix everything, but it changed something. I used to chase his approval like it was a finish line. But it turns out, some races aren't meant to be won. They're meant to be witnessed. And in his quiet, stubborn way, I think he saw me long before he said it. There's a kind of peace that comes from letting go of what could have been. From learning to hold space for the imperfect ways people show up. Not every father is built for softness. Not every soldier knows how to say I love you. But sometimes they do it anyway. In a folded letter. In a saved photo. In the way they look at you from across a crowded room and nod like they finally see who you've become. I won't pretend it's enough for everyone. Some wounds need more than a sentence to heal. But for me, it was a start. It reminded me that silence doesn't always mean absence. That love can take years to find its voice. We wait so long for the people we love to stand up for us. to choose us, to say the thing that unlocks whatever we've been carrying around for too long. Sometimes it comes too late, sometimes just barely in time. But when it comes, even in fragments, it's still worth holding on to. So if you've been waiting for someone to see you, to understand you, or simply to say, I was wrong, I hope you know this. Your worth doesn't depend on whether they ever say it, but if they do, let it in. Let it change something. And if this story reminded you of someone, I'd love to hear it. Tell me, who's the one person you wish had stood sooner?